What's up guys, Spin Firearms here, and today we're going to be talking about the Ruger Max 9. Now that I finally got some rounds through it, got to mag dump this thing, shoot hollow points through it, run it, and actually carry it. And we're going to explain why I carried it and why I have this holster that I always preach against with me right now. We're going to get into it. But before we get started, hit the like button, drop a comment down below, and subscribe. Let's get into the Ruger Max 9. Now what's interesting about this handgun is the reviews are all over the place. The reviews that I've seen are pretty decent, but it's mostly the comments that stuck out to me. The thing about reviews is that's one person, that's one gun. And there's maybe 10 to 50, somewhere in between there, major reviewers, right? That get the handgun sent to them, whatever the case may be. Majority of those reviews were decent. But you go to the comments and it's about 50-50, I would say. Honestly, I like the Ruger Max 9. I do have some things I don't like about it. But it's carried great. It's shot just fine. There's a couple things I do want to touch on that I don't like about it, or not necessarily don't like, but are a little bit negative when it comes to the review aspect of it. But let's get into it. So this is how I've been carrying it right now, actually. 10+1, simple, flush. 10+1 is plenty of 9mm, especially with a gun like this that is very accurate. Now the texturing, on point. I actually really like the texturing, and I got to carry it all week in semi-warm weather, so I got to sweat a little bit. I got to, feel the handgun out, as it gets warm, as it gets sweat on it, how it feels in the hand, stuff like that, and it passes. It's a pretty decent texturing. It could use a little more, but overall it's pretty good, and I wouldn't say you need to add any grips, but that's just me. The overall slide rattle is something that I've been concerned about, but at the range it proved not to be an issue at all. The manual safety, stiff, doesn't affect anything. The magazines are good quality, as you can see. Not going to have any rusting or any issues with that. So solid magazines. One of the main concerns a lot of people had was this trigger. Now as you can see, it's spongy. Like, check this out, ready? Right before you pull it, you see that? But honestly, it's a decent trigger. If you're actually shooting at the range, that handgun does not move at all when you pull that trigger, and that's a big thing. A lot of these triggers out here, you go to pull it, and the way they're designed, you sort of tweak the gun a little bit depending on that trigger. But this trigger is actually pretty solid, not the best by any means, but it's pretty decent for everyday carry. Then we got to do reset. Long reset. But like I said, I'm used to my FN 503 and handguns like that have a longer reset. Overall, the trigger's decent, nothing special, but it's good enough. There is other trigger options out there that a lot of people have been mentioning. Actually, on my Ruger EC9S, I have a short stroke trigger for it. They make the same thing for the Max 9. I think they make it for the Bodyguard. I think it's made by Aegis, or Aegis, however you would pronounce that. And I've heard for a lot of people that really makes the trigger a lot nicer. Also, I'm hoping that trigger would sit a little further back, giving me more room in this trigger guard, as it is a very narrow space. But it is what it is. Some also mentioned maybe this reach from the front of the trigger to here is a little much. I've actually found it to be pretty good. You're not stretching or anything. I have short, fat fingers, wear size large gloves. It's actually pretty easy to get your finger on it and pull that trigger, so no issues there. My number one concern with this handgun, for people, new shooters, females, whatever the case may be, is the recoil impulse. Now this handgun is larger than a Hellcat, larger than an FN Reflex, larger than a P365, a little larger than a GX4, so generally it's a little bit bigger than the average Micro 9, and the recoil is a little bit more. So generally you have a heavier gun, a larger handgun, stuff like that. Generally you're going to have less recoil. That is not the case with the Max 9. I don't have so much a problem with the trigger on this thing than the recoil control. And I handle recoil really well. I shoot pocket pistols, I shoot 10mm out of Glock 29s, I carry 40, 357 SIG with 3.1 inch barrels. I shoot stuff that's heavy in recoil. My favorite handgun, or my second favorite handgun, is the Hellcat, which is known to be snappy. I have found that the Max 9 is more snappy than any other Micro 9 that I currently own. And that's just being real. It's close to the Hellcat, but a little more than the Hellcat. And I don't know what it is. I feel like it's So it's snappier, but you get some of the feel in your hand. If you've ever shot a handgun, like for instance, a lot of people have complained that the Torch G3C gives them like a trigger finger pinch, or it hurts their finger to shoot it. In this case, you feel all the recoil build up right here. It's almost like springs were properly designed to give you minimal recoil control, and your hand has to absorb it. Now, getting follow-up shots was just fine. Shooting this thing, it's a good shooter. It just is more snappy than your general Micro 9. I have a bunch of single stacks that shoot a little bit better than this. I mean, pocket pistols that shoot better than this. But overall, it's a very accurate handgun. It just has some recoil, and that's the main thing. But is it anything crazy different? Like if I go from my Hellcat to this, is that going to make a big difference with my shooting? I actually don't see any difference. I can shoot this back to back with my Hellcat, my P365. Now I may be a little slower with this simply because of how high that firearm comes up. But overall, it's a relatively good shooter. And if you are used to shooting 9mm, I would just say train with it and you'll be just fine. I mean, I shot defensive rounds out of this. Everything is manageable. It's all recoil that's manageable. I always tell people, they always complain about 40 and 357 SIG. Well, if you shoot enough 40 and 357 SIG, you won't be complaining anymore. So overall, a very solid shooter. Just has a little bit more recoil than your average Micro 9. Not a whole lot. One of the high points of this handgun for me, other than the texturing, are those sights. The sights are amazing. Glock, take notes. You got a blacked out textured rear, and they sort of have a little Glock bracket that's blacked out. It's actually pretty cool. You don't really notice it, but it is there. And then you have a tritium fiber optic front sight. So the fact that Ruger went out of their way and did that, solid sight picture. Never have to change them. That'll last you, you're probably your whole time with this handgun, basically. And the finish, I'm actually surprised. So because I forgot my holster for my Glock 43 with a TLR6 on it, I got out here and figured, okay, I'm not going to find any good holsters in stores for a Glock 43 with a TLR6. I brought this just to keep testing it and shoot it. Well, this ended up being my carry piece this week because this is what I had in my bag over there, and I had this handgun as well for testing. So I've actually been carrying this, even though I didn't want to start carrying it yet. We were only 300 rounds through testing this thing, but I figured, hey, I'd rather have something on me, legal, in a holster, safe, than to carry something without a holster and so on. Even though this may be a little less reliable, it proved reliable so far through its round count. So I carried the same exact defensive ammo that I ran out of this. That's exactly what I brought with me. I only ran a couple of different rounds through it. So I brought one of those ammunitions that was super accurate for this handgun, which was Critical Duty Flex Tip 135 grain. It ran solid. So if you guys are having feeding issues with yours, get the Critical Duty Flex Tip 135 grain. It's a great round, a great defensive round to start breaking in your handguns. You want a heavier weight while breaking in handguns, especially budget handguns. If you're building stuff, have a new budget handgun, run 124, 147, 135. Literally, the heavier the round, sometimes the better, just for getting all those parts to lock in and start working as like one unit. But overall, I really like the Ruger Max 9. Like I said, it is snappier. Nothing you can't figure out. Haven't had any issues with it. It's ran, but what I was going to say is I've been carrying it in warm weather, and one thing I was really worried about was the salt water in the air and the moisture. How will that affect the finish? And so far, even when there's barrel wear and stuff like that, no rusting. And that optics plate was already discolored, if you notice it, when it came on the handgun. But we got no rusting, no issues, no problems, and this thing has been sweated on. It's been, exercised with, walked around the beaches, all sorts of stuff. Not a single issue with it. So far, I mean, I think I've put it through a decent test when it comes to overall places. It's been in the cold, it's been in the hot, it's been in the salt water, it's been sweated on, it's had different ammunition put through it. So far, I could say it's actually a pretty solid handgun the way it's been holding up. I like it. I just don't like it quite as much as some of my other options, but I get why people really like this handgun. So overall, I would give this handgun maybe, for the price and everything, if you get it around $350, I would say it's a 7 or 8 out of 10. It's a pretty solid package right out of the box. You might want to swap out that trigger, which is understandable, but honestly, right out of the box, if this is all you had, solid. It's got capacity, good sights, a trigger that does not even flinch the handgun at all. solid finish compared to other Rugers that I've dealt with. So good texturing, good ergonomics, good magazines. I really have zero complaints other than it's a little snappier than your other Micro 9s, but that's not saying much. A little bit doesn't make the biggest difference in the world. It's still 9mm at the end of the day. You may just feel it a little more in your hand. But if it goes bang, who cares about the pain right here, right? Thanks for watching, guys.